Hello classy people, this is Josh the Top Hat Gamer, and this week I'm reviewing Dark Souls 3. The Souls series is very special in terms of video games. In a world of simple stories and gameplay hand-holding, Dark Souls offers a relatively unique experience with its vague lore and tough yet rewarding core gameplay. So, does Dark Souls 3 deliver on the expectations set by its predecessors? Let's take a look. Dark Souls 3 is set in the world of Lothric, a land where the darkness approaches and the first flame threatens to go out. The Lords of Cinder, heroes who have linked the flame in a previous life, are required to extend the Age of Light once again, but have abandoned their thrones. It's up to the hero to hunt these lords down and return them to their thrones in order to hold off the dark for just a little while longer. Dark Souls 3's narrative is a return to form as far as I'm concerned. The second game in the series felt far too reliant on elements from the original Dark Souls, and while this made for some nice fan service, it made the story less enjoyable on its own. Dark Souls 3 introduces a number of new elements and concepts to the series' lore, giving newcomers a fair bit of story that doesn't require previous knowledge of the series to appreciate. With that said, there are still plenty of nods to the other games, giving veterans something to sink their teeth into as well. As with the other games in the series, much of Dark Souls 3's story is left up to interpretation. Dark Souls 3 doesn't tell you much, but it implies plenty and leaves you to search for the details on your own. Much of the lore is found by examining item descriptions and the environment itself, meaning that, much like the series' signature gameplay, the story is challenging to really get caught up in, but once you do, it's satisfying to take part in. Much like the game's story elements, Dark Souls 3 is a massive improvement over the previous game in terms of visuals. The overall quality of the visuals is far less murky and seems to perform better on the whole. There are still some problem areas, and the game isn't without some texture glitches or frame rate drops, but for the most part, these were relatively spaced out and never affected the game's already difficult gameplay sections. In terms of style, Dark Souls 3 takes the dark fantasy genre and knocks it up a notch. The environments are almost all creepy or oppressive, and the enemy designs vary wildly, from standard undead soldiers to spider skeleton things and everything in between. On top of the oppressive style is an attention to detail that makes wandering around the world of Dark Souls as important to the storytelling as the hundreds upon hundreds of detailed item descriptions. The sound design complements the visuals nicely as well, adding an air of loneliness to the moment-to-moment gameplay with its minimal soundtrack and various monstrous groans and shrieks. The most impressive moments of Dark Souls 3's audio is with the thoroughly impressive boss themes, however. Each of these themes fits the horror and adversity you're about to face with epic choral and orchestral movements that change to fit each phase of the already impressive boss encounters. And before I move on, I think it bears mentioning that the many NPCs in the game deliver fantastic performances no matter how small. Each line of dialogue, regardless of its importance, is delivered with a perfectly somber tone, lending an amazing weight to every word they speak. Possibly the most well-known aspect of Dark Souls as a series is its unforgiving gameplay, which forces you up against hordes of tough foes with the constant risk of losing all of your souls at a moment's notice. For the most part, this remains as it always has. The game rewards players who take their time observing their surroundings and playing smart. Conversely, it punishes those who rush forward without planning in advance. As an RPG, Dark Souls 3 allows for a number of different approaches to the game, from spell-flinging sorcerers to range-focused rogues and melee-based warriors, or anything in between really. Allowing for that much variety in playstyle is aided by the immense amount of weapons and armor found in the game, with plenty of brand new items on top of a greatest hits collection of gear from the Souls series as a whole. As far as the moment-to-moment gameplay goes, you're generally going to be taking most of your time fighting through the various areas of the game, usually more than once, as the grueling difficulty will force you to die and lose your souls on multiple occasions. Combat is as satisfying as ever, with many enemies gaining new skills to counter a lot of the tricks that veteran players have learnt over the years, for instance, circle strafing. On top of that, most of the game's weapons have been thoroughly improved, and on top of the already in-depth movesets available to you, Dark Souls 3 introduces weapon arts, special skills assigned to a weapon or weapon class. While I didn't really utilize these much, more options are never a bad thing. Almost more dangerous than the combat is the world itself, featuring a number of traps and ambushes ready to punish careless players. But more than that, the levels themselves will reward diligent adventurers with well-spaced out bonfires to act as checkpoints. There are some moments where you'll feel like it's been forever since you last saw a bonfire, and then you'll unlock some doors or descend some ladders, and all of a sudden, the genius of Dark Souls' twisting pathways dawns on you as you open a shortcut that loops back to the bonfire you were last at. These moments are shining beacons of hope and joy in a world that looks to drain you of both. Speaking of draining you of hope, I'd be a fool to neglect mentioning the game's boss encounters, and Dark Souls 3 has some of the most interesting and challenging bosses in the series. I can't think of a single encounter that doesn't feature a second phase that isn't radically different from the first, and even in their first phase, most bosses feature unique and interesting mechanics to set themselves apart from others in the series. If I had to nitpick, I'd say that there are maybe too many that feature additional foes aside from the boss itself, but each encounter that does this at least incorporates a unique idea, such as having the enemies attack each other, or having the main target of the boss fight shift between multiple weaker opponents. My only real complaint with the game and its various systems is that it's about as obtuse as ever, especially with regards to the game's various side quests. A lot of the side quests in Dark Souls 3 are really interesting, and give you access to a fairly large amount of gear, but all it takes is missing a single moment or doing things slightly out of order for you to find one of your various acquaintances dead for no particular reason. Even so, these side quests add a fair amount of content to an already sizable game, and if you're really looking to get your money's worth, then the variety and difference between playstyles almost makes each subsequent playthrough feel like a totally new game, even if you're only doing multiple playthroughs just to make sure you can complete every side quest. Besides, you can always spend your time with the game's multiplayer, which, in my limited experience, feels about as smooth and accessible as it ever has. Being invaded or bringing in allies to assist you doesn't feel half as laggy as it has in previous games, and there are a number of new covenants to join, adding a number of new twists to the multiplayer. Dark Souls 3 would feel almost like a greatest hits collection of the Dark Souls series if it wasn't for the surprising implementation of new ideas in not only the game's lore, but its weapons and boss concepts as well. These new concepts, layered on top of the challenging combat and brilliant level design, makes for a game that is as rewarding as it is tough. Dark Souls 3 gets the Top Hat Gamer rating of excellent. I was a big fan of Dark Souls 2, but the game had its problems. Dark Souls 3 feels like a return to form, and has taken the best aspects from the games that came before it, and mixed it all together, while sprinkling a little bit of new stuff on top. If you're a fan of the Souls series, or just looking for a challenge in a fascinating world, then this is right up your alley. Thanks for watching. I hope you found the review informative. If you missed the last review on Quantum Break, click the annotation. Now, if you'll excuse me, I have to go die some more.